The man staring back at me from the tailor's mirror was a stranger. At 67, I had long grown accustomed to practical work shirts and durable trousers, the kind of attire suited for running a business, not for making a statement. Yet today, I found myself in a deep charcoal suit with elegant cufflinks that cost more than my typical clothing budget for half a year. "It's an excellent fit, Mr. William," the shop assistant remarked with a smile, smoothing a lapel. "The color brings out the blue in your eyes." I gave a slight nod, unaccustomed to such praise. Today, however, I wanted to believe it. I was getting ready for the wedding of my only daughter, Clara. In just 2 weeks, she would be marrying her fiancé, Paul, and despite the distance that had grown between us, I wanted to present myself with dignity. "I'll take it," I announced, moving back to the changing area. While the assistant was handling the transaction, I gazed out at the bustling Wilmington streets. It felt peculiar that in my entire life, I had never really left this town. It was here I launched my first laundromat, here I laid my wife to rest, and here I raised my daughter. Now, Clara was getting married, marking what felt like the final significant chapter of my life in Wilmington. After completing the purchase, I walked out of the shop, bag in hand. My old, reliable Ford was waiting for me in the car park. As I settled into the driver's seat, a glance at my watch showed it was 2 in the afternoon. I had a 3 o'clock meeting with the wedding agency. The office for Pearl Weddings was situated in a modern business complex on the edge of the city. It was a bright, airy space, its white walls adorned with photographs of blissful newlyweds. A pleasant young woman named Carrie escorted me into a conference room. "Hello, Mr. William. We've compiled all the documents you asked for," she said, arranging folders on the polished table. "Are you still certain you want your involvement to be kept private?" I confirmed with a nod. It had been my condition from the very beginning. "Yes, Clara and Paul must not find out that I am covering the majority of the costs. They believe the groom's parents are funding the entire event." Carrie's expression was one of confusion, a reaction I anticipated. In her line of work, parents likely competed to show off their financial contributions, not conceal them. "My daughter and we have a complicated relationship," I offered, though no explanation was truly necessary. She would never accept financial assistance from me directly, fearing it would diminish her standing with her fiancé. I left out the longer story of how, after my wife Diane passed away 16 years ago, I had single-handedly managed my business while raising our daughter. I didn't mention how Clara, upon entering university, began to feel embarrassed by her humble origins, or how she progressively distanced herself, viewing me as too plain and uncultured for her new social sphere. And I certainly didn't mention how, 5 years ago, after I sold my chain of laundromats for a considerable sum, her interest in me was suddenly rekindled, though it was focused solely on my finances, not me. "Everything will be handled with the utmost confidentiality, just as we planned," Carrie reassured me. "Here are the contracts for the banquet hall, the rental services, the photographer, the floral arrangements, and the musicians." I examined each document with care. The total was staggering, over $80,000, but it was a sum I could manage. Clara was my only child, and regardless of our fractured bond, I wanted her wedding day to be magnificent. "You are aware that if there's a cancellation within a week of the date, we cannot issue a complete refund, correct?" Carrie questioned, offering me a pen. "I understand," I replied, signing the final page. "But nobody is going to call off the wedding." I had no inkling at that moment of the profound irony those words would soon hold. The 2 weeks passed in a blur. Throughout that time, Clara never once called me, never inquired if I planned to attend. An official invitation never arrived, but I dismissed it as an oversight. Surely, a daughter wouldn't neglect to invite her own father to her wedding. The morning of the event dawned bright and clear. I rose early, took a leisurely shower, and combed my hair, which was still full, though now completely silver. I donned my new suit and put on a fresh tie. The gift, a check for a significant amount to fund their honeymoon, was placed inside a tasteful envelope. The ceremony was to be held at the Belvedere Hotel, Wilmington's most opulent establishment. As I parked my old car among a sea of luxury vehicles, a wave of self-doubt washed over me. Perhaps I should have taken a taxi rather than showing up in my dated Ford. No, that was foolish. I had always been a practical man and wasn't about to change my ways to appease the opinions of others. The hotel lobby buzzed with activity. Guests in fine suits and elegant dresses mingled, their laughter and chatter filling the air. I scanned the crowd for any recognizable faces, but most were strangers to me, likely friends and relatives of Paul. Over the years, Clara had rarely introduced me to her circle of acquaintances. "Grandpa," a cheerful voice called out. I turned to see Leo, my 22-year-old grandson from Clara's first marriage, hurrying towards me. He was tall and lean, with my blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. Leo was the only one who consistently stayed in touch. "You made it," he exclaimed, embracing me. "I'm so happy." I was worried you might not come because he trailed off, but I understood his meaning, because of my tense relationship with Clara. How could I miss my own daughter's wedding? I smiled. "You look very handsome, my boy." Leo, dressed in a sharp groomsman's suit, adjusted his tie and glanced around. "Come on, I'll introduce you to some people," he suggested. Just then, Clara approached us. My daughter appeared stressed, despite the joyous occasion. At 42, she was still a beautiful woman, tall and poised, with a well-groomed elegance that was marred only by the tension in her brow. Her eyes, an exact replica of her late mother's, regarded me with poorly hidden annoyance. "Dad," she said, her tone a mix of disbelief and frustration. "What are you doing here?" Her question caught me off guard. This was not the welcome I had anticipated. "I came for your wedding, of course." Clara looked around nervously before taking my elbow and guiding me away from the other guests. "Listen," she started, her voice low but firm, "I thought we were clear on this. You're not on the guest list." I stared at her, completely bewildered. We hadn't discussed any such thing. Her 2 brief calls in the past month had been curt and formal. "What are you talking about, Clara? How could I not be invited to my own daughter's wedding?" She sighed, adopting the expression of someone forced to explain the obvious. "Dad, this is a very exclusive event. Paul's parents are here, they're influential friends, our colleagues." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I just don't think you would feel comfortable here." In that moment, the truth struck me. She hadn't just forgotten to invite me, she had deliberately excluded me. I, the man who had worked with his hands his entire life, who had built a business from the ground up, was deemed unsuitable for the refined company of her new family. "You're ashamed of me." It was a statement, not a question. "No, of course not," Clara replied quickly, but her averted gaze told a different story. "It's just that Paul is very particular about everything being perfect. His parents have invested a great deal of money and you don't want your simple, laundromat-owning father to spoil the atmosphere." I finished for her. "Dad, don't start," she snapped, clearly irritated. "I'm just asking you to understand. We can get together after the honeymoon, just us." At that moment, Paul joined us. He was a striking man in his late 30s, slim and impeccably dressed in a designer suit. His face wore an expression of polite inquiry. "Clara, my love, is everything all right?" he asked, his eyes sweeping over me with a quick, evaluative glance. "Yes, everything is fine," she answered. "Dad was just on his way out." Paul offered a contrived smile. "Oh, Mr. William. It's a shame you couldn't be with us for the ceremony." Perhaps another time. He spoke as if my presence was a fleeting interruption, as if I were a mere acquaintance who had dropped by unannounced. I looked at Clara, hoping she would say something, anything, to defend me. But she remained silent, refusing to meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, but you weren't invited," she finally whispered. "Please, just go." I felt a sting of tears, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of them. For years, I had ignored her neglect, made excuses for her behavior, and pretended everything was fine. But today, something inside me broke. "As you wish," I nodded, maintaining my composure. "Congratulations to both of you." I turned to leave, but Leo grabbed my arm. "Grandpa, please, don't go," he pleaded, his eyes welling with tears. "I want you to be here." I gently patted his cheek. "It's all right, son. Call me tomorrow. I walked towards the exit, feeling the eyes of the guests upon me. Some had been observing our exchange with open curiosity. I wondered what they had been told. Did they know the bride's father wasn't welcome at his own daughter's wedding? Stepping out of the hotel, I took a deep gulp of fresh air. The sun was still shining, but my world felt dim. I walked mechanically to my car and slid behind the wheel. For several minutes, I just sat there, staring blankly, trying to process what had just happened. Then, I reached into my coat, pulled out my phone, and checked the time. It was 4:20 in the afternoon. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in 40 minutes, followed by the banquet at 7, all of which I had paid for. I glanced at the envelope containing the honeymoon check, still resting in my pocket. Slowly, I turned the key in the ignition and pulled out of the Belvedere Hotel's parking lot, leaving my daughter to celebrate the start of her new life, a life that apparently had no place for her father. The journey home felt interminable. I drove on instinct, barely registering the traffic signals or the cars around me. Phrases from the confrontation echoed in my mind, * you weren't invited. Dad was just leaving. Exclusive event * each word was a fresh blow. 67 years I had lived, only to be dismissed from my own daughter's wedding like an unwanted intruder. My neighborhood greeted me with its familiar tranquility, the old oak trees lining the streets and the well-kept, middle-class homes. I parked in front of my single-story house with its white picket fence and sat for a moment, unable to make myself get out. It felt as if staying in the car could postpone the moment I had to fully accept the painful reality. Finally, I forced myself out and walked up the path. The key shook in my hand as I unlocked the front door. Inside, I kicked off my shoes and walked into the living room. The house, the container of most of my life's memories, felt alien and hollow. My gaze fell upon the photographs on the mantelpiece, Clara as a little girl, a gap-toothed grin on her face, Clara as a teenager, holding a soccer trophy, Clara at her university graduation. In every picture, she was smiling at me. When had it all soured? At what point did I become an embarrassment to her, a source of shame? I picked up a photo of my late wife, Diane, and me, holding a young Clara on a beach trip. Diane was 33 then, I was 38, and Clara was 8. We looked so content, so normal, a simple family on vacation. "What would you say about this, Diane?" I whispered, tracing my wife's face in the photograph. "What would you say to our daughter?" But Diane had been gone for 16 years, taken by a sudden heart attack when Clara was just 26. Our daughter still loved me then, still visited every weekend, and was not yet ashamed of where she came from. I returned the photo to its place and sank into my armchair. Diane and I had started our little business together, a laundromat on the corner of Oak and Fifth. She had handled the books and customer service, while I managed the machinery and repairs. When she passed, it all fell to me. But I persevered. Over the next decade, I expanded the business into a chain of 7 locations across Wilmington. In a drawer in my desk, I still had the stubs of checks I'd written for Clara over the years, for the down payment on her first apartment, for her wedding to Leo's father, for the legal fees during their divorce, for Leo's private school tuition, and to clear her credit card debt during a rough patch. I was always there for her, a steadfast source of both emotional and financial support. But with each passing year, Clara drifted further away. Her new friends, her career in finance, her aspirations for high society, these things built a chasm between us. When I decided to sell the business 5 years ago, Clara suddenly showed a renewed interest in my life. She visited, she called, she asked about my health. I wasn't naive, I knew her primary concern was the money from the sale. But a part of me hoped for a flicker of genuine care. The sum I received was indeed substantial, $2.3 million, more money than I had ever imagined holding. I bought a new car, the same Ford the first drove to the wedding today, renovated the house, and invested the remainder conservatively, following the advice of a financial planner. When Clara learned of the amount, she presented me with a brilliant business opportunity. She wanted me to invest in a friend's tech startup. I declined, deeming it too risky. She was offended, calling me old-fashioned and lacking vision. I reminded her that my old-fashioned approach had built a successful enterprise from nothing. We argued, and after that, her visits grew scarcer, her calls even shorter. When she announced her engagement to Paul 8 months ago, I was genuinely happy. I thought perhaps this new chapter might help us repair our fractured bond. What a naive old man I was. The phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. It was my personal manager from the bank, Richard, making his routine weekly call to high-deposit clients. "Mr. William, good afternoon," his cheerful voice came through the line. "Just calling to check if everything is in order with your accounts and investments." I was silent for a moment, my eyes fixed on the wall clock. 5:15. The ceremony would be over by now. Clara and Paul were husband and wife. In an hour and a half, the banquet would commence, a lavish affair for 120 guests, complete with fine wine, a live band, and dancing, all financed by me. "Mr. William? Are you there?" Richard asked, a note of concern in his voice. "Yes, sorry," I cleared my throat. "Richard, I have a question. If I need to cancel payments that are scheduled to go through in the next few hours, is that feasible?" "Technically, yes, if they haven't been fully processed." "What payments are we discussing?" I opened my laptop and found the email from the wedding agency with the itemized expenses. Several large transactions, totaling around $80,000, were listed: the Belvedere Hotel, Golden Leaf Catering, Jameson's Photography Studio, Rosemary Floral Designs. I read them off, my resolve hardening with each name. Richard was quiet, clearly taken aback. "Those are significant sums, Mr. William. May I ask the reason?" "They're for my daughter's wedding reception," I explained, "but there have been unforeseen circumstances." I paused. "I want to cancel all of them immediately." "I understand," Richard said cautiously. "But I must inform you that there could be substantial penalties for cancellation." "I'm prepared for any penalties," I cut in. "Please, just do what's necessary." There was a pause on the line, filled with the sound of Richard typing. "All right, I see the payments in the system. Most are scheduled for tomorrow, so we have time to halt them. A few might have been partially authorized, but I'll contact our back office immediately." "Thank you, Richard." One more thing, an idea began to form. If I cancelled the payments, the money would return to my account. But what for? It had been intended for Clara, for her new life, a life where I was not welcome. "I'd like to open a trust account in the name of my grandson, Leo William. I want to transfer those funds to it, of course, Mr. William." "That can be arranged. We'll need to complete some paperwork, but we can initiate the process today." We went over the details, and Richard promised to call back once the payments were successfully stopped. After we hung up, a strange sense of relief washed over me. For the first time in a long time, I had acted with conviction, refusing to be a passive participant in Clara's disregard for me. My next call was to the wedding agency. Carrie answered on the third ring. "Pearl Weddings, how may I help you?" "Hello, Carrie, this is William." "Oh, Mr. William," she sounded surprised. "The wedding has just started. Everything is proceeding as planned. Was there something you needed?" "I'm calling to inform you that I am cancelling all payments associated with the wedding." Her moment of silence, then an uncertain laugh. "I'm sorry, what? You must be joking." "No, Carrie. I've just been on the phone with my bank. All transactions are being reversed, but that's not possible." Her voice trembled. "The ceremony is happening right now, the guests are all here, the banquet is in an hour. You can't just—" "I can," I said firmly. "And I have. There's a force majeure clause in our agreement. This qualifies." "Mr. William, please, let's discuss this. What happened? Perhaps we can find a compromise." "The only solution, Carrie, is that the payments have been stopped." "But the vendors, the venue. This will be a catastrophe." Panic laced her voice. "That is not my problem." I could almost feel her scrambling for a response on the other end. "Okay, I will have to inform the bride and groom." "Go right ahead," I replied evenly. tell them their sponsor has withdrawn the funding, but they believe the groom's parents paid for it all. Carrie exclaimed. How am I supposed to explain this? That isn't my concern, I paused. Although, you could tell them the truth. That the bride's father, the one who wasn't invited to the wedding, was the one paying for their party. So, my goodness, Carrie whispered. I'm so sorry, I had no idea. Well, now you do. Good day, Carrie. I ended the call and set the phone on the table. My hands were trembling, but not from fear or anger. It was an odd, almost forgotten feeling of liberation. I had allowed Clara to use my love and my money for so long, offering nothing in return. I had waited for respect, for gratitude, for simple warmth, and had received none of it. Suddenly, the phone rang again. Leo's name appeared on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. Grandpa, my grandson's voice was tense. Where are you? Why did you leave? I closed my eyes. Leo was the only one I truly worried about in this whole mess. Your mother asked me to leave, son. She said I wasn't invited. What? He cried. That can't be true. She wouldn't say that. Yes, Leo. She did. On his end, I could hear a low murmur of voices. The ceremony must have concluded, and guests were likely moving toward the banquet hall. That's awful, Grandpa. I'll talk to her. I'll make her apologize. She had no right. Don't, my boy, I interrupted gently. Don't ruin the celebration for yourself. Have fun, dance, enjoy the party. What party? There were tears in his voice. How can I have fun knowing how they treated you? It's not right. There are many things in life that aren't right, son. This isn't the first, and it won't be the last. Grandpa, Leo's voice dropped to a near whisper. Something strange is happening. The hotel manager is here, arguing with Mom and Paul. They look really upset. I didn't respond. It seemed Richard's actions were swift, or Carrie had already delivered the news. Either way, the consequences of my decision were beginning to unfold. Grandpa, are you still there? Leo asked anxiously. Yes, son. Listen, whatever happens tonight, I want you to remember that I love you, and that will never change. You're scaring me, he said with a nervous laugh. You sound like you're saying goodbye. No, of course not, I reassured him. I just want you to know you can always count on me. I know, Grandpa. I love you too. I could hear voices calling for Leo in the background. I have to go, he said quickly. I think there's a problem starting with the banquet. I'll call you back, of course, son. Go. I hung up and leaned back in my chair. It was done. There was no going back. Whatever came next, I knew I had made the right choice. For the first time in years, I had stopped being an invisible wallet for my daughter and had started to respect myself. The phone rang again. This time, it was Clara. I stared at the screen, watching the device vibrate on the table. 1 ring. 2. 3. Then, silence. A moment later, a text message appeared. Dad, we need to talk. Call me. Urgent. I flipped the phone face down. I had no desire to speak with my daughter. Not today. Let her first comprehend the gravity of her actions. Let her feel even a fraction of the pain she had inflicted on me. I got up and walked to the window. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Strangely, for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly alive, as if I had just shed a crushing weight I had been carrying for decades. The phone began to ring again, and again, and again. Leo nervously fiddled with the cuff link on his wrist as he watched the scene unfold. What was supposed to be his mother's perfect wedding was rapidly descending into chaos. The grand banquet hall of the Belvedere Hotel was breathtaking, with its pristine white tablecloths, shimmering crystal, and lavish floral centerpieces. But the celebratory mood had vanished, replaced by an atmosphere of thick tension and confusion. In one corner, his mother, Clara, was in a heated argument with the hotel manager, a portly man in a stern suit. Paul, her new husband, stood beside her, his perfectly composed exterior failing to conceal the panic in his eyes. There must be some sort of mistake, Leo overheard his mother insisting. The payments were all confirmed last week. The manager shook his head grimly. Mrs. Thorne, I just got a call from our finance office. The payment was rescinded. We cannot offer services without payment, but that's preposterous. Paul's parents. Leo furrowed his brow. Paul's parents. He had always thought his mother was covering the wedding costs. Clara frequently spoke of her financial independence and success in the investment world. His thoughts were cut short by Paul's sharp voice. Check again. It has to be an error. The guests are here. We can't just cancel the reception. Leo glanced around. Indeed, nearly 120 guests were present in the hall. Many sat at their tables, exchanging puzzled looks. Others gathered in small clusters, whispering and casting curious glances toward the argument. Paul's parents, a distinguished-looking couple in their 60s, detached themselves from a group and approached their son. What's the trouble? Paul's father, Geoffrey Redgrave, a tall, silver-haired man with an authoritative air, inquired. Why isn't the champagne being served? Paul turned to him, his face a mask of desperation. Dad, there's been a mix-up with the payment. They're saying the funds were withdrawn. Geoffrey scowled. What funds? Leo watched as Clara and Paul exchanged a frantic look. At that moment, a woman with a clipboard and a Pearl Weddings name tag hurried into the hall. Mr. and Mrs. Thorne, she said, addressing the newlyweds, I must speak with you urgently. They moved to the side, forming a tight huddle. Leo, acting on a sudden impulse, subtly drew closer to overhear their conversation. All payments have been cancelled by the primary sponsor, the agency representative said in a low, urgent tone. We've tried reaching the bank, but the decision is irreversible. The primary sponsor. Paul interjected. What are you talking about? Who is the primary sponsor? The woman looked baffled. Your father, Mrs. Thorne. Mr. William. He paid for the vast majority of the wedding expenses. Leo could barely suppress a gasp. Grandpa. It was his grandfather who had financed this entire opulent affair. Clara's face went from pale to a deep, angry red. That's absurd. My father didn't pay for anything. It was all handled by Paul's parents. Geoffrey Redgrave, overhearing his name, stepped closer. What's this, Clara? Margaret and I only paid for the rehearsal dinner. You told us you were handling the main event. Paul was now ashen. He looked at his wife, his eyes wide with disbelief. Clara, what is she talking about? Leo saw his mother swallow hard, a muscle twitching in her jaw. She frantically pulled out her phone and began dialing, moving away from the group. Leo was certain she was calling his grandfather. Seizing the moment of confusion, he slipped out through the glass doors onto the hotel's terrace. He had to call his grandpa right away. Pulling out his own phone, he dialed the familiar number. Grandpa, he asked as soon as William answered. It's a complete disaster here. What's happening? There was a brief silence on the other end, followed by a soft sigh. I suppose they found out I cancelled the payments, so it's true. Leo whispered, though he was alone on the terrace. You paid for Mom's wedding? But why was it a secret? Your mother wouldn't have accepted the help directly, my boy. You know how our relationship is. She wanted to throw a spectacular wedding for Paul, but she couldn't quite afford it on her own. Leo leaned against the terrace railing. The evening air was mild, and in the distance, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and gold. Such a beautiful evening for such an awful event. But why did you cancel everything? He asked, though he already suspected the answer. Because your mother threw me out of my own daughter's wedding, William replied plainly. She told me I wasn't invited, that I didn't belong at her exclusive event. Leo shut his eyes. He loved his mother, but her snobbery and her desperate need to appear more important than she was could be unbearable. That's horrible, Grandpa. I'm so sorry. It's not about being sorry, Leo. It's about respect. I've supported your mother for years, helped her whenever she needed it. All I ever wanted in return was a little consideration, a little gratitude. But to her, I was never good enough. Not sophisticated enough, not educated enough. A commotion from inside drew Leo's attention. Through the glass, he could see the banquet hall descending into chaos. Staff from the floral company were dismantling arrangements from the tables and packing them into crates. Waitstaff were collecting glasses and silverware. Guests were looking at each other in bewilderment, and some were already getting up to leave. "Grandpa, the whole thing is coming apart," Leo reported into the phone. "They're taking the flowers, the caterers are packing up the food. It's a nightmare. I'm sorry you have to see this, son." William's voice was filled with genuine regret. "You shouldn't be caught in the middle of this. It's not about me." Leo shook his head, though his grandfather couldn't see. "It's just... This is so humiliating for Mom and Paul. All their guests are watching their perfect wedding fall to pieces. Sometimes, lessons are painful," William said quietly. "But they are necessary." Another noise caught Leo's eye. Through the doors, he saw his mother, red-faced with fury, yelling at the catering manager. Paul stood beside her, looking as though he might be sick. His carefully coiffed hair was disheveled, and his tie was askew. "Mom is losing it," Leo said. "She's screaming at everyone, and Paul looks like he's about to collapse." "Your mother never handled adversity well," William sighed. "When things don't go her way, she loses her temper." At that moment, Leo saw Clara pull her phone out again, stabbing at the screen. A second later, William's phone must have rung. "Mom's calling you," Leo said. "I can see that," his grandfather replied. "It's the 6th time in the last half hour. I'm not answering." "There's no point talking to her until she calms down." Leo stepped back inside the hall. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. The hotel manager was now loudly requesting that all guests vacate the premises if the bill was not settled within 30 minutes. Paul's parents looked mortified. Jeffrey Redgrave was now arguing fiercely with Clara, jabbing a finger toward her chest. "Grandpa, Paul's parents are fighting with Mom now," Leo relayed. "Apparently, she told them she was paying for everything herself, and they had no idea you were involved. Your mother never could resist an opportunity to seem more successful than she is." William's voice was tinged with bitterness. "She always had to impress the right people." Leo edged closer to the argument, trying to go unnoticed. "You swore you had all the expenses covered." Jeffrey boomed. "You said your investments were thriving. And now we find out your own father was secretly bankrolling this, a father you didn't even have the decency to invite." "That's not true." Clara shot back. "I had no idea he'd interfered. This is all some kind of misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Jeffrey sneered. "The only misunderstanding here is that my son married a woman like you." Paul, standing nearby, finally burst. "Dad, please, stop," he begged. "Not here, not now." But it was too late. The remaining guests were openly gawking at the drama. One was even recording the scene on their phone. Leo winced, imagining the video spreading across social media. "Grandpa, this is awful," he whispered. "Everything is ruined." Jeffrey called Mom a liar in front of everyone. "I am sorry to hear that," William responded, and Leo could sense the genuine regret. "But your mother made her choice when she decided I wasn't good enough for her new life." Just then, the hotel manager clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced in a loud, clear voice. "Due to unforeseen circumstances, this event has been cancelled. We must ask you to please leave the premises within the next 15 minutes." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Guests began to collect their things, many approaching the newlyweds to offer bewildered condolences. Leo saw Paul cover his face with his hands and stumble out of the hall, followed by his mother. Clara stood alone in the center of the chaos, looking utterly lost and humiliated. "They've officially cancelled the banquet," Leo informed his grandfather. "They're making everyone leave." "I understand," William replied softly. "You should go too, son. You don't need to stay there." "What about Mom? I can't just abandon her like this." "You're a good son, Leo." kinder than she deserves. But sometimes, people have to face the consequences of their actions alone. Leo was torn. On one hand, he understood his grandfather's position. The way his mother had treated him was inexcusable. On the other hand, she was his mother, and seeing her so defeated was heartbreaking. Just then, Clara spotted him and strode in his direction, her face a mask of fury. "Are you talking to him?" she demanded, pointing at the phone in his hand. "Let me speak to him." Leo instinctively recoiled. "Mom, now's not the right time. Give me the phone," she nearly screamed, extending her hand. "Grandpa, Mom wants to talk to you," Leo said quickly into the receiver. "She's really angry, I can hear," William replied. "Don't give it to her if you don't want to." "But if she insists, I'm prepared to speak with her." Before Leo could decide, Clara snatched the phone from his hand. "Dad," she yelled into it. "What in God's name have you done? Do you have any idea what you've just ruined?" Leo couldn't hear his grandfather's response, but he saw his mother's expression shift from rage to disbelief, then back to fury. "How could you?" Her voice trembled. "How could you humiliate me like this, in front of everyone? In front of Paul's parents, our friends?" There was a pause. "This is completely different. Yes, I didn't include you on the guest list, but that is no reason to sabotage me. You did this for revenge, admit it." Another, longer pause. Clara's face grew pale. "No, you don't understand. I can't just pay it now. I don't have that kind of cash, and the banks are closed." Leo watched his mother listen, her shoulders slumping as if all the air had been let out of her. "Please, Dad," her voice was now pleading. "Reinstate the payments. We can talk about our issues later. Right now, my reputation, my marriage. Everything is on the line." She listened for another moment, and then her face contorted with rage. She yelled something unintelligible and shoved the phone back at Leo. He fumbled but managed to catch it. "Grandpa," he asked tentatively, bringing the phone to his ear. "Are you there?" "Yes, son." William's voice was weary but steady. "I'm afraid I couldn't help your mother. She's furious." Leo watched Clara gesturing wildly as she argued with the hotel manager again. "I've never seen her like this. She always had a temper." William sighed. Even as a little girl, if things didn't go precisely her way, she would have a tantrum. Clara pulled out her phone again and started making another call. Judging by her frantic gestures, the conversation was not going well. "I think she's trying to get money," Leo said. "She's calling everyone she knows." "I doubt that will help," William replied. "It would take a substantial sum to cover everything. Your mother doesn't have friends who can lend her $80,000 on a Saturday night." $80,000. Leo gasped. "That's how much this cost?" "Your mother and Paul wanted to make a big impression on his parents and their high society friends. An impression like that comes with a price tag." The hall was nearly deserted now. Most of the guests had departed, and the staff were removing the last of the decor. Paul returned to the hall, flanked by his parents. His eyes were red, his expression defeated. He began to berate Clara, who looked utterly broken. "It doesn't look like their marriage is going to last long," Leo said sadly. Paul is livid. So are his parents. If their relationship can't withstand the first real test, it wasn't as solid as it seemed, William observed philosophically. The manager approached Clara and said something, pointing at his watch. She nodded, her shoulders slumping in final defeat. "We have to leave," Leo reported. "The manager is insisting now." "Where will you go?" William asked. "Do you have a place to stay?" "Yes, I have a room booked here at the hotel. There was supposed to be a family brunch tomorrow." "Oh, good. Stay there. Don't go back to your mother's place tonight. She needs time to cool off." Leo nodded, though his grandfather couldn't see. "Okay, Grandpa." "I will then." "Leo?" "Yes?" "I love you, son. Whatever has happened between me and your mother doesn't change my feelings for you one bit." Leo felt a lump form in his throat. "I love you too, Grandpa. I get why you did it. I really do." They said their goodbyes, and Leo slipped his phone into his pocket. The hall was now empty except for his parents. Paul was standing by the exit, furiously typing on his phone. His parents had already left. The wedding that was meant to usher in a new, happy life had ended before it even truly began. Leo walked over to his mother. "Mom," he said softly. "Let's go." She lifted her gaze, and he was startled by the raw despair in her eyes. "He ruined everything," she said hoarsely. Purely out of spite, Leo shook his head. "No, Mom. You ruined everything yourself. The moment you kicked your own father out of your wedding." He turned and walked toward the exit, leaving his mother to stand alone in the empty banquet hall, surrounded by the wreckage of her failed celebration. I was jolted awake by a furious pounding on my front door. At first, I thought it was a dream, but the banging came again, loud and insistent. A glance at the clock showed it was just 7 in the morning. Who on earth could be here so early? The knocking escalated into a frantic drumbeat, and I heard Clara's voice. "Dad! Open this door right now. I know you're in there." I rose slowly from bed. After the previous day's turmoil, I felt a peculiar sense of calm. There was no fear, no regret, just a quiet certainty that I had done the right thing. I pulled on my robe and walked to the front door. Clara continued to hammer on it with such force I worried the hinges might give way. The neighbors must surely be awake by now. Well, let them hear what kind of daughter I had. I opened the door and stood there, looking at Clara in silence. She was a wreck. Her suit was wrinkled, her hair was a mess, and her eyes were red-rimmed as if she hadn't slept at all, which she probably hadn't. She spat, jabbing a finger at me as she pushed her way inside. "You've ruined my life." I closed the door calmly and turned to face her. "Good morning, Clara," I said evenly. "You're up early, don't you dare," she practically shrieked. "Don't you stand there and act like nothing happened." I walked past her into the kitchen. I was going to need coffee for this conversation. "I remember exactly what happened," I said, filling the kettle. "You asked me to leave your wedding, so I cancelled the payments I was making for it. You planned this." Clara followed me, her voice rising. "You secretly paid for it all just so you could pull the rug out from under me. You knew I didn't want you there." I placed the kettle on the stove and turned to my daughter. "No, Clara. When I made the arrangements with the agency 2 months ago, I had no idea you wouldn't invite me. What kind of father would ever assume such a thing?" She was quiet for a second, but quickly regrouped. "You should have told me you were paying. It's manipulative to do things behind my back. Would you have taken the money if I'd offered it to you directly?" Clara looked away. "That's beside the point. The point is, you destroyed my wedding. You humiliated me in front of everyone, in front of Paul's parents." The kettle began to whistle. I calmly removed it from the heat and began to prepare my coffee. "Would you like some?" I asked her. "No." She slammed her fist on the kitchen table. "I didn't come here for coffee. I came here to find out why you would do this to me." I sat down at the table, cup in hand, and looked at my daughter. "Why I did it? Why did you throw me out of your own wedding, Clara? Why did you tell me I wasn't invited? Why were you so ashamed of me in front of your exclusive guests?" "I wasn't ashamed," she mumbled, unconvincingly. "It's just. The wedding was for a certain crowd of people, a crowd your father doesn't fit into," I finished for her. "Because I'm a simple man who has worked with his hands his whole life. Because I don't have a college degree or high society connections. Because my background embarrasses you." Clara looked as if she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Finally, she just waved her hand dismissively. "It doesn't matter now. What's done is done. But you have to fix this." I raised an eyebrow. "Fix it? How?" "Reinstate the payments," she said in a rush. "Call the bank, the agency, all the vendors. Tell them it was all a mistake." I took a sip of my coffee, the bitter taste a welcome anchor. "It's too late, Clara. The funds have been returned to my account. I got the confirmation from the bank late last night. Then make new payments." She began pacing the kitchen. Paul is a wreck. His parents are threatening to disown him. We had to stay in some cheap motel because the hotel cancelled our room. I watched her, reminded of the little girl who would storm around the room when she didn't get the toy she wanted. So many years had passed, but so little had changed. Where were you planning to go for your honeymoon? I asked. Clara stopped and looked at me, suspicious. What does that have to do with anything? Italy. 2 weeks. The flight is tomorrow. Or, it was supposed to be, and who paid for that trip? She frowned. I did, of course. Paul and I paid for it. No, I shook my head. I paid for that as well, through the same agency. It was all part of the package. Clara froze, her expression shifting. She slowly sank into the chair opposite me. What do you mean? She asked, her voice suddenly quieter. What was the total cost? I sighed. $86,400. That's what your wedding and Italian honeymoon cost, Clara. And I paid for all of it. She stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. That's impossible. You couldn't have. Where would you get that kind of money? I sold the business 5 years ago, remember? For $2.3 million. I invested most of it, and I live off the interest. I can afford to spend some of it on my only daughter's wedding. Clara was stunned into silence. I could almost see the gears turning in her head as she reassessed the situation. Her father, whom she had written off as a simple old man with a modest pension, was actually a wealthy individual capable of funding a lavish wedding and a trip to Italy without blinking. Why didn't you tell me? She finally asked. Why did you hide that you had so much money? I wasn't hiding it, I replied calmly. You never asked. You were only ever interested in what amount of money you could get from me. Remember your friend's startup? You wanted me to invest $200,000 without any real business plan. It was a promising venture, she said defensively. We could have tripled the investment, or we could have lost it all. I chose a more reliable path, and as you can see, I didn't do so badly. Clara looked flustered. Her anger was slowly being replaced by a mix of confusion and, surprisingly, a hint of respect. She was looking at me with new eyes, as if seeing me for the first time not just as her father, but as a successful, independent man. This moment of clarity was short-lived. Within seconds, her face adopted the calculating expression I knew all too well. She leaned forward. Dad, her voice became soft, almost affectionate. I understand you were hurt. You had every right to be. I was wrong not to invite you. It was a mistake. I waited silently for what was coming next. I knew this tactic, admit a minor fault, then pivot to the real request. But you don't want my marriage to begin under such a dark cloud, do you? She continued. Think about Paul. This isn't his fault. And think of his parents. They're influential people. They could help us. Help you in the future. How could they possibly help an old man like me? I asked with a hint of sarcasm. Clara missed the irony. Jeffrey has connections everywhere. If you ever needed a top doctor, a spot in the best retirement community, I couldn't help but laugh. A retirement community? Really, Clara? I'm 67, in excellent health, and have more than enough capital to live comfortably for the rest of my days. Why on earth would I need a retirement community? She looked embarrassed but quickly recovered. It was just an example. The point is, it would be better for everyone if you just fixed this. Pay the money, we can redo the wedding dinner. I'll invite you personally. You can have the seat of honor. I set down my empty cup and shook my head. No, Clara. The wedding money is gone. Her face changed in an instant. The mask of feigned warmth dropped, revealing raw anger. What do you mean, no? You can't just say no. This is my marriage, my reputation at stake. I've already allocated the money, I said calmly. It's going toward Leo's education. Clara froze. What? Last night, I opened a trust fund in Leo's name. $80,000 will be there for his education. College, a master's degree, maybe even a PhD. He's 22, with his whole life ahead of him. You can't do that, she was outraged. That money was for my wedding. It was for your happiness, I corrected her. But you made it very clear that your happiness doesn't include me. So, I found a better use for it. Clara leaped from her chair, her face flushed with rage. You're doing this out of spite. You just want to ruin my life. I stood up as well, looking my daughter directly in the eye. No, Clara. I'm doing this because, for the first time in a long time, I've chosen to respect myself. For years, I put up with your neglect, your embarrassment over my background, your constant requests for money without so much as a thank you. I let you use me, hoping that one day you would see me as more than a financial backstop, as a father who loved you and deserved your respect. I paused, feeling a lump form in my throat, but I held it back. But you crossed a line yesterday. Kicking your own father out of your wedding isn't just disrespectful, Clara. It's cruel. And I will not tolerate it anymore. Clara stood there, breathing heavily, her hands clenched into fists. You will regret this, she said through gritted teeth. I swear you will. The only thing I regret, I replied, is all the years I spent letting you manipulate me. But that's over now, she sputtered, unable to find words. What am I supposed to tell Paul? His parents? They're waiting for an answer. Tell them the truth, I shrugged. That you threw your father out of the wedding and he cut off the funding. Or make something up. You were always good at excuses. Clara grabbed a mug from the counter and hurled it to the floor. The porcelain shattered, sending coffee grounds scattering across the linoleum. This isn't over, she hissed. I'll find a way to make you pay for this. And that money for Leo's education? I'll contest it. He's my son. I have a right to it. You can try, I said calmly. But the trust is legally sound. My lawyer made sure of it. The money belongs to Leo, and neither you nor I can touch it. Her face twisted in a mask of impotent fury. She turned and stormed toward the exit, sweeping everything from the countertop as she went, the salt shaker, the sugar bowl, a vase of artificial flowers. I never want to see you again, she yelled, turning at the doorway. You're not my father. You've never been a real father to me. The word should have wounded me, but strangely, all I felt was a sense of release. It was as if the final, toxic thread connecting me to her had finally snapped. Goodbye, Clara, I said quietly. She slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. I heard her car start and speed away with a squeal of tires. I sank back into my chair, looking at the broken shards on the floor. It was a fitting metaphor. Our relationship was shattered too, and there was no putting it back together. But instead of bitterness, I felt a peculiar peace. For the first time in years, I was doing what I believed was right, not what was expected of me. Not sacrificing my own dignity for the sake of my daughter's whims. The ringing of the phone pulled me from my thoughts. Leo's name appeared on the screen. I sighed and answered. Grandpa, my grandson's voice was filled with concern. Are you okay? Mom just called me. She was hysterical. I'm fine, son, I replied. Your mother paid me a visit. We had a talk. She's upset, but she'll manage. She said that you gave the wedding money to me for school. Is that true? I smiled. Yes, it is. I've set up a trust fund for you. The money is there for your tuition, for college, grad school, whatever you choose. But Grandpa, Leo sounded shocked, that's a huge amount of money. I can't accept that. You can, I interrupted gently. And it's the best investment I can make. You're a smart, talented young man. Use this to get an education, build a career, become your own person. I don't know what to say. I could hear the emotion in his voice. Thank you. But I'm worried Mom will cut you off completely now. That's her choice, I sighed. I will always be open to reconciliation if she genuinely wants it. But I will not accept any more disrespect. I understand, Leo said quietly. I'm on your side, Grandpa. What she did at the wedding. It was unforgivable. We talked for a while longer. Leo shared that Paul and his parents had left early that morning, leaving Clara alone at the motel. It seemed the wedding wasn't the only thing that had failed, the marriage itself was now on life support. After hanging up with my grandson, I started cleaning up the mess Clara had made. As I swept the broken porcelain, I thought about my future. Perhaps it was time for a change. Wilmington was filled with too many painful memories. Maybe I should move, start a new chapter somewhere else. Once the kitchen was clean, I sat down at my computer and opened a real estate website, just browsing, exploring possibilities. The phone rang again. It was Richard from the bank. Mr. William, I'm calling to confirm that the trust fund in Leo Williams' name has been successfully established. The paperwork is complete, the funds have been transferred. You'll just need to stop by a branch to sign a few documents. Thank you, Richard. I'll come by this afternoon also, he continued. Your daughter called the bank, trying to get details about the trust. She claimed it was some kind of mistake. I sighed. There's no mistake, Richard. The trust was my decision and is completely in line with my wishes. That's what I told her, Mr. William. But she was quite insistent. She threatened legal action. Let her threaten, I replied calmly. She has no legal standing to challenge my decisions about my own money. We finished our conversation, and I returned to browsing real estate listings. Now, however, I wasn't just looking at houses in other cities, I was also looking at cruise ship itineraries. All my life, I had dreamed of seeing the world, but I had always postponed it, first for my family, then for the business, then for Clara and her endless needs. It was time to start living for myself. For the first time in years, the thought brought no guilt. Sunlight streamed onto the porch of my new home in Savannah, Georgia. I sat in a wicker chair, sipping iced tea and watching a gentle breeze rustle the leaves of the magnolia trees. For months had passed since the day of Clara's failed wedding, the day my life took a sharp, unexpected turn. Those months had been a whirlwind of activity and decisions I should have made years ago. Selling the house in Wilmington was surprisingly fast, going for above the asking price in just 3 days. It felt as if fate itself were nudging me forward. Finding a new place took a bit longer, but when I saw this charming single-story house with a screened-in porch and a small garden in a quiet Savannah neighborhood, I knew it was the one. To many, relocating at 67 might seem rash. My old neighbors in Wilmington had certainly thought so, shaking their heads and muttering about staying in familiar surroundings in one's later years. But I felt that now, with most of my life behind me, was precisely when I needed a change. I needed new air, new scenery, new possibilities. My first few weeks in Savannah were spent setting up my new home. I bought all new furniture, new dishes, new linens, nothing from my old life. It felt like a true fresh start. Then, I began to explore the city, its historic squares, museums, restaurants, and shops. I even signed up for a woodworking class at the local community center. As a young man, I had enjoyed carpentry but had given it up to focus on my business. Now, decades later, the feel of the wood and the hum of the tools felt like reuniting with an old friend. My phone vibrated with a text from Leo. He had sent a picture of a complex architectural model, his final project for the semester. The caption read, "Top of the class. Thanks for making grad school possible, Grandpa." I smiled. After the wedding fiasco, Leo had enrolled in a master's program in architecture, a long-held dream he had thought was out of reach due to the cost. Now, thanks to the trust fund, he could focus entirely on his studies. Leo was the only person from my previous life I remained in regular contact with. We spoke on the phone every few days, and last month he flew down for a weekend visit. We explored Savannah's historic district, drank coffee in quaint cafes, and talked about his classes and my new life. Inevitably, the conversation turned to Clara. "Dad's still angry," Leo had said, staring into his cup. "He never mentions you, but when I do, his whole face just tightens up." I nodded. That was predictable. Clara had never been one for forgiveness. Even as a child, she could hold a grudge for weeks over a minor slight. "What about her and Paul?" I asked. "Did they ever have a proper wedding?" Leo made a face. "Yes, if you can call it that. It was pathetic. He described how, after the initial ceremony fell apart, Paul's parents had demanded the engagement be called off. But Clara, somehow, had convinced them to give her a second chance, promising a new, more modest wedding. The ceremony took place 3 weeks after the first attempt, not at the lavish Belvedere, but in a small restaurant on the outskirts of Wilmington. Instead of over 100 guests, there were just 30 close friends and family. Instead of a live band, there was a DJ with a laptop for 2 hours. And instead of a honeymoon in Italy, they spent a weekend at a nearby resort. It was so awkward, Leo recounted. All the guests knew about the first wedding's failure. You could hear them whispering. Paul's parents sat there looking like they were at a funeral. Mom put on a brave face, but Dad looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. I could picture it perfectly. Clara, who had spent her life trying to impress people, must have been mortified. You know the most ironic part? Leo continued. In his speech, Dad thanked Paul's parents for their generous financial support, lying right to everyone's faces as if they'd paid for the first wedding and not you. I shook my head. That was classic Clara. She would rather tell a lie than admit a truth that made her look bad. And Paul? How is he with your mother now? I don't know, Leo shrugged. They're still together, but you can tell something's broken. Paul is constantly finding fault with her, like she's forever indebted to him. And she's become sort of timid. She's lost that old confidence. He sounded sympathetic, and I understood. For all her flaws, Clara was still his mother. Did she ask about me? I had to ask. No, Leo shook his head. But she knows we talk. Sometimes, if I'm on the phone with you and she's in the room, I see her listening. I think, deep down, she misses you, Grandpa. Her pride just won't let her admit it. I didn't comment on that. Our family had enough illusions. I wasn't interested in creating new ones. If Clara truly missed me, she knew my number. The memory of that conversation faded, and I returned to the present, to my porch in Savannah, as the afternoon sun began to dip lower. I finished my tea and went inside. On my desk were brochures from a cruise line, a booking confirmation, and a packing list. In 3 days, I was embarking on a 2-week Caribbean cruise, a trip on a luxury liner with stops at several islands. It was a dream I had cherished for decades, finally becoming a reality. When we were young, Diane and I often spoke of such a trip, always someday when the business was on its feet, someday when Clara was grown. But Diane passed away without ever seeing those turquoise waters, and I had kept deferring the dream, first for work, then for my daughter's needs. Now, I was finally doing it for myself. The trip was costly, but I could afford it. After selling my Wilmington house and buying the one in Savannah, I had a considerable amount left over, and my investments provided a steady income. I could afford some luxuries without jeopardizing my future. Of course, moments of doubt still crept in. A voice in my head, sounding suspiciously like Clara's, would whisper, "What if you get sick? Who will look after you in a strange city? Wouldn't it be better to save that money for a rainy day?" But I had learned to quiet that voice. Life is too short to constantly postpone happiness. I spread out the items I planned to take on my trip: a new pair of swim trunks, sunglasses, a wide-brimmed hat, and a camera. Beside them lay a Spanish phrasebook. I had started studying 2 weeks ago, hoping to be able to communicate a little with the locals on the islands. My phone vibrated. It was Mark, my new friend from the woodworking class. We had plans for dinner before I left. "William, you ready?" "I'll be there in 20-inch." Ready and waiting, Mark. I went to change, pulling a light, patterned shirt from my closet, another recent purchase. In Wilmington, I would never have worn something so bold, fearing the neighbors' stares or Clara's sarcastic remarks. But here in Savannah, I was free from those constraints. Here, I was simply William, a new resident taking up woodworking and learning Spanish. Mark arrived right on time, an energetic man in his early 60s with a quick wit and a contagious laugh. He was a retired history professor, divorced with no children, who had traveled extensively. "Great shirt," he exclaimed as I opened the door. You'll be the talk of the Caribbean. We went to a small seafood place near my house. Over dinner, Mark quizzed me about my cruise itinerary, offering tips from his own travels. Make sure you try the local rum in Barbados, he advised. And don't be shy about haggling at the markets. It's part of the experience. I listened with a smile, mentally taking notes. It was in moments like these that the contrast between my past and present lives felt most stark. Before, such a conversation would have seemed like pure fantasy. Me, William, haggling in a market in Barbados? Unthinkable. Now, it was a tangible, exciting possibility. After dinner, Mark and I strolled through the evening-lit streets of Savannah. We ended up on the riverfront, where tourist paddle boats were docked. In 3 days, I'll be on a ship much bigger than that, I said, gazing at the boats. And that's just the start, Mark winked. After the Caribbean, there's the Mediterranean, Alaska, Scandinavia. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, I laughed. Let me get through this one first. Back at my house, I did one final check of my packing list. Everything was ready. I sat in my armchair by the window, looking out at the night garden. My thoughts drifted back to Clara. Leo had told me she'd taken a new job, still in finance but with a smaller firm and a lower salary. Paul was apparently not pleased, seeing it as a step down. But Clara herself seemed to have accepted it. She's quieter now, Leo had said. Less boastful. More realistic. Perhaps the lesson of the disastrous wedding had not been entirely lost. Perhaps Clara was finally beginning to understand that wealth and status were not the most important things in life. Or perhaps those were just a father's hopeful illusions. Either way, I had decided to no longer let her problems define my existence. For too many years, I had lived my life measured against her opinions and needs. That chapter was closed. I reached for the photo album on the end table, the only thing besides clothes and papers that I had brought from my old house. I found the picture from 35 years ago, me, Diane, and a small Clara on the beach, all of us beaming. I hope you would approve, Diane, I whispered, tracing my wife's face. I hope you'd agree that I deserve this new life. I closed the album. Tomorrow was my last day of preparations. Then, in 3 days, I would be standing on the deck of a massive cruise ship, watching the shore recede and a vast ocean of possibility open up before me. This was my new life, a life without the burden of past hurts, without the weight of unmet expectations, without the constant need to prove my worth to anyone. It was a life filled with new places, new people, and new discoveries. My own life, so long deferred, had finally begun. Before turning in, I stepped onto the porch one last time. The Savannah night sky was filled with stars. A gentle breeze carried the scent of jasmine from a neighbor's garden. I took a deep breath, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over me. Thank you, I whispered into the darkness, not sure to whom. Maybe to fate, or maybe to myself. Thank you for this second chance. At 67 years old, I was finally living the life I had always wanted. And there was so much more yet to see, to feel, to learn. A new life was just beginning.